I think that's pretty good for having rock structures. And what we're going to do now is we're going to get into placing down trees and bushes and all sorts of other kinds of foliage. So what we're going to do, triangle up on the D-pad as per usual. And before, where I was opening a gallery and getting a specific set of rocks, now I want to actually place down a whole palette because I want to see what trees I like, and I want to visually inspect them before I put them down. I'm pretty sure I like this gallery here, but just to be sure, I'm going to go over somewhere outside of the map. I'm going to place down this gallery here. Okay, there's a good variety of trees here, and I like that, and I think they match with the vibe. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the largest tree first. I didn't want to cut it. Copy it. I'm going to take that, and I'm going to just dot that large tree somewhat randomly around the map. Now, if you'll notice, the sort of algorithm that I'm working with is that I take the largest, most imposing features of the landscape first, and then I go smaller and smaller. So, for instance, this wall of rocks, while the individual rock might not be the largest, these mountains might be the largest, the wall itself as a single item is the largest. So I started with that one, and then I put the individual mountains because they are the next largest, and then I put the accenting rocks to those mountains beside them because those are the next smallest still. And then I went around and placed these smaller rocks here, sort of flavor accent rocks. So as you can see, what I went from is very large and imposing on the environment to then smaller and smaller and smaller. The reason why is if we start with all of the small things, then we then go from small to large, what will happen is that we've already claimed a bunch of space for the small, and the large is going to have a hard time really having a defined space of its own. So we start with the largest things, like these trees, so that they can have a defined space. They can take up as much room as they need, and not have to worry about small assets like bleeding into their textures and stuff like that. So I think that's pretty good. Now we're going to take the small version of that tree. We're going to place it around it. So here's one thing about nature. Nature has algorithms. It's not a code, but it's rules that nature follows. When a tree drops its seeds, the seeds typically stay close to it. So what we're going to do is we're going to create these baby trees. They're going to be close to the parent trees, right? As you've heard the saying, an apple doesn't fall far from the tree. So too is that true with acorns and pine cones and all sorts of other seeds that a tree might use. But we want to kind of create rules for ourselves, because if we just do everything random, it's not going to look natural, because nature has rules, right? If you've studied biology in school or anything like that, you'll realize that nature, it doesn't have a referee or anything, but it has rules. Different plants grow in different ways, have different kinds of seeds, different rocks erode in different ways, mountains spawn in certain ways. And of course, I'm not really following geological rules here, but it looks close enough that we are in a mountain valley. So we're going to take this pine tree. We're going to turn on drops, and we're just going to go buck wild with it. We're just going to put this guy everywhere. We're just going to plant a bunch of them all over. We're going to be far less conservative with our placement, like we were with the big trees and the baby big trees. And these are just going to be everywhere. They're going to grow like a weed on our map. any space that is open, a little too close, we are just going to place a bunch of these nice pine trees, and we don't have to worry too much about where they're being placed, so long as they're not inside another tree or inside our base. The placement should be just fine. When I've placed a bunch of these, I'm going to fly back and I'm going to take a look. And honestly, for a first try, that seems pretty well distributed. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to put some more around this base here, around the back here. Like so. Now we're going to take the baby pine tree. You can see we have a baby pine tree here. And we're also just going to go buck wild with it and put it in the empty spaces in between the pine trees. There we go. We're just going to worm our way through this little forest of ours. And just make sure there are plenty of these pine trees distributed evenly amongst this forest, and that we do not forget about areas. Also, we want to fly around a little chaotically so that there's a natural feel to its distribution. It's not just straight lines. And put some in this area. Now we're going to fly back and take stock again. As you can see, the baby trees are fairly well distributed. Let's go down into the forest itself. There we go, it's looking pretty good. But we still have some really good vision, so I don't want good vision. I want a nice thick forest. So one asset that will really help us out in obscuring things is I'm going to go into this palette and select a bush specifically, because I know there's a bush in that palette. And here we are. Here's a nice bush to hide in. Now, as you saw with the pine trees, I was flying around and letting them drop because their asset is designed in such a way that it's actually, they're able to do that, and it looks like they're coming out of the ground. But if we look at this bush here, if we let it drop, well, I don't know any bush that grows in the air. Bushes grow in the dirt. So we're going to have to hand place these a little more. And I'm just going to make sure it's sunk into the ground. I've turned drop off so that it doesn't potentially... Well, it looks like it doesn't have the risk of doing that. But sometimes when you put drop on, things will drop all the way down to the bottom of the back rooms here. And we don't want that, we want it on our map. So let's take this bush here. We're just going to... I'm not going to put too many, just some every so often. Enough to hide our players if they need it, to jump from cover to cover and get to a bush. Where there's a nice open area like this right here. You see there's a nice field here. I'm going to put a bush right in the middle of it. Open area here. Put a bush. There's an open area here. I'm going to put a bush. Bush. And just like that. There we go. Alright, so let's fly and take stock, see if there's any areas we haven't really put any bushes. Looks like this area is a little unbushified, so we're just going to make sure that it has a nice bush. You know, I've been saying bush a lot. It starts to sound weird. Floating bush here. There we go. Alright, so that's looking pretty good. Oh, we got another floating. We got a floater. Let's just fly around and make sure that we don't have too many other floaters. I think we're good here. This one's borderline, but I think it's okay. Alright, well there we go. And just like that, in a couple minutes, we have ourselves a nice lush forest for our players to frolic around in. And as you can see, when we first started this map, it was completely barren, and we could see the enemy base from our base, but now it is almost completely obscured from us, which is a good thing. Let me just take stock and make sure that the space in front of each base is equivalently deforested. Let me give it a little more cover here. A little bit. There we go. A little more bushes around here as well. Oops. Alright, I think we're good. So there we are. Another step that I think I'm going to do is I'm going to take these baby trees, I'm going to grow them out a little bit. I don't want them to be as big as our big trees, and we're just going to place them on our mountain ridges here. So the reason I'm using the small ones is because this is actually kind of a bit of an optical illusion. I'm going to shrink this baby tree again. Right, so the player's mind is already primed that there are big trees and little trees. And if we look up here, we have these trees, but also these little guys mixed amongst them. It's going to look like they're way farther away. Be a little smaller. It's going to look like those trees are far away, much farther away than they actually are. Because a player might assume that they're actually this big, when in reality they're a little closer to this design. So let's just go around and place these trees in certain areas. Where it was barren before, like I said, oopsie. That's not what I wanted to do. There we go. Where it's barren, like these areas here, I'm going to place trees so that it visually takes up some room, just so that it doesn't look so sterile and bland. We just want to give a little bit of life. We want to make it look like it's actually some kind of national park or whatever it is. We want to make it look natural, because we are capturing the flag in a forest. There we go. So there we go. We have a forest to give our players cover. We have a mountain ridge to keep our players contained within the forest. We have some rocks for our players to hide in. We have a base for our players to spawn in. And we have an objective for our players to play with. That being the capture the flag flags. Oh, you know what? Let's put some trees on top of this thing. I think that would be fun. There we go, look at that. Very nice. And look at that. That's how easy it is to make a forest if you sort of have an idea of what you're going to be doing. Now, one big recommendation that I will make when you're creating an artistic piece like this, and I do think that this is artistic, look up what is called reference pictures. Now, what a reference picture is just type in pine forest, mountain ridge, anything like that. Whatever you want to create, look up a reference picture. Because what you're going to notice is that in those reference pictures, you'll find the algorithm that I was talking about. What are kind of the rules? How do these trees line up? You know, how many, like, it's not like there's a bunch of these really big trees, right? These big trees take a while to grow. So there's only going to be a few of them, but these pine trees are small and they grow real quick. You know, something like that. It's a very simple thing to think about. And of course you'll go, Dadoy, of course the big tree takes longer to grow. But sometimes we don't think about simple things like that. We take it for granted. And we forget about implementing these rules into our maps. And if we just take a minute to look up a reference picture, just go on Google or whatever search engine you have and type in pine forest, you will get an idea of what is the layout of a classic pine forest and how you can replicate that in your creative maps. Well, let's playtest this. Let's see how it runs. Alright, we got the blue text because we are on blue team. Forgive me here, I didn't add a vehicle. So we're just gonna have to enjoy the beautiful scenery that I've just set up for us. Got the enemy flag. Now we're gonna go from bush to bush. Oh no, I'm exposed. Can't climb that. And there we go. We've captured it. All right. So we have an objective, we have spawns, and we have a nice environment to play around with. I think we'll cut that off now. This is a nice two-parter in environmental design. Thank you guys for tuning in, and I'll catch you next time.